Welcome, everyone, to this episode of Beyond the Crucible, the podcast that dares to talk about setback and failure, but not so we can commiserate, so we can elevate. I'm Gary Schneeberger, co-host of the show, and our mission today is to offer you the hope that your crucible experiences, those tragedies and challenges you faced or are facing right now, do not define you. They refine you. They did not happen to you. They happened for you. And no one knows that better. And who could know that better than the guy who came up with the concept, the founder of Crucible Leadership, the co-host of the show, Look at me. Well, today you're kind of the co-host with what we're going to be doing today. So that's funny. That was actually not so untrue. He's the host of the program. He is my friend, Warwick Fairfax. Warwick, welcome. This is a moment, 2 months in the making. So I'm looking forward to it.
Absolutely. Second Act Significance has been a great series, and this will be so fun wrapping it up.
Yeah. Well, and that was very co-hosty of you, because that was going to be the next words out of my mouth, is that this is the wrap-up episode of the previous 8 weeks, listener. And that's 2 months of time. That's, 1/6 of the year we have dedicated to this subject, because we believe, and we think it's been borne out in this series, that this is extremely important to talk about. So how we're going to do this is you'll be hearing from the guests who shared their stories during this series, who offer all kinds of inspiration, hope, practical stories about moving into the life you were born to live on purpose and in service to others. And to get us going, as it's often the case when it's just me and Warwick talking without a guest, we call them dialogue episodes, if you want to hear the inside baseball term. We're going to use as our discussion template for this a blog, the newest blog at crucibleleadership.com, actually written by me, which summarizes some key learnings and some key takeaways, and most importantly, some steps you yourself can take as you look to navigate that journey from first act to second act. And as a bonus, because we like to add bonuses when we do the podcast, we're going to add a fourth tip. So we've got 3 tips in the blog about how you can move from first act to second act smoothly and with success and significance. And then we've added a 4th one here for our discussion. So it's going to be really, I hope, quite an emboldening conversation, a buoyant conversation, an important conversation. And we're going to begin here as we do it. And this is fun for me to begin here personally, because the story that we're going to begin with and I'm going to tell is actually the story of someone I had the pleasure to know closely in the mid to late 90s when I lived in Palm Springs, California. And I'm still his son-in-law is my spiritual father, the man whose church I became a Christian in. And I got to know this individual very well in the mid to late 90s when I lived in Palm Springs. And his name is Albie Pearson. Now, you probably have never heard of Albie Pearson. A couple things about Albie Pearson that make him interesting is that he was you can look it up on Wikipedia, it's true. He was the 1958 American League Rookie of the Year in Major League Baseball. Okay, so that just level sets kind of who Albie Pearson was. But before that, long before that, when he was just 6 years old, he was just a baseball-mad, baseball-loving boy living in Southern California. And he didn't have a lot of friends around that he could play ball with, so he did what any enterprising young wannabe ball player would do. He snatched his mother's decorative pillows, silk pillows, off the couch, built a diamond in his backyard, and did what I didn't do with my mom's pillows, but I did the same thing. I would create baseball games, just me and my bat and my mind. And I would, have the play-by-play and do the whole thing. What Albie's constant game, the game he always played out, miming it with a bat in his hand and nobody else around, just his mom's silk pillows, Albie would always have the game end the same. It was the World Series. The bases were loaded. He was up. Mind you, he's 6 years old when this is all happening. He was at the plate the ball would come across the plate and Albie would hit a home run, a grand slam to win the World Series. This is a fun part, against the Yankees, because he's from Southern California. Even back then, right after the era of Gehrig and Babe Ruth, people who didn't live in New York didn't like the Yankees then either. So he would hit the home run that beat the Yankees. And as he rounded the bases, right, he would hear the roar of the crowd, and it was a beautiful thing. He was basking in the glory of what he felt was going to be his stamp on life, a Major League Baseball player. But in one of those games that happened in his single digits, something occurred that hadn't occurred before. As he was crossing home plate on this mythical home run, as he's running the bases in his backyard, stepping all over his mom's good pillows, Albie heard a voice in his head say this to him: "Join my team." He didn't know exactly what that meant. So as any 6-7-year-old would do, he was like, okay, put it out of his head, went on, kept playing his games. But here's where the story gets really interesting, because Albie Pearson would move on to make his major league dreams come true. As I said, he was the 1958 American League Rookie of the Year. He was then, he bounced from to the Baltimore Orioles, and he ended up with the California Angels. At the time, were the Los Angeles Angels. They've been California, Los Angeles, Anaheim, Los Angeles again now, I think. But they were an expansion team as the Los Angeles Angels in 1960. And he was, in fact, the first batter to ever appear at the plate for the Los Angeles Angels in 1960. And here, just if you're on video, you can see this, is a picture of Albie. That's Albie right there. He and his teammates all holding their bats like rifles, because they were hot shots at the plate. But that's young Albie in 1960 with his teammates on the Angels. And what makes the story about 6-year-old Albie beating the Yankees in the World Series with a home run is that he actually did hit a home run against the Yankees. No, it wasn't the World Series, but he was at the plate against a pitcher named Whitey Ford. That's a name you probably heard if you're a baseball fan. Whitey Ford was a 6-time All-Star. He's in the Major League Baseball Hall of Fame. He's well known as a Yankee legend, and he's left-handed. Albie happened to be left-handed, which, if you know baseball, hard for a lefty to hit a homer off a lefty. But Whitey Ford threw in a curveball. Albie parked it over the right field fence, and he got to not step, not round the bases on his mom's pillows, but on actual bases in a Major League Baseball stadium. And as he got to home plate, as he crossed home plate, he was amazed that his mind went right back to that moment at age 6 that he hadn't really thought about, when he heard that voice say, "Join my team." And in that moment, Albie realized, as much as he loved baseball, as much as his career was going pretty well, he had 128 home runs, I think, in a 10-year career. One of them was off Whitey Ford, fulfilling in many ways that dream he had when he was 6. As much as he loved that life, he realized when he remembered that moment, "Join my team," that there was something bigger, better for him, more significant for him. And what Albie has done from that moment on, after his career ended, and it wasn't too long after that, till this day, I just talked with his son-in-law, who's my spiritual father, just today. Albie is still pastoring, more than 50 years as a pastor, to churches. And in the late 90s, when I knew him lived in the same city, he started, and this is Albie then. You can see this photo here. That's Albie with a bunch of young men. He he opened a nonprofit called Father's Heart Ranch to teach at-risk male youth God's principles and help them navigate life. And that was the life of significance that Albie discovered was his destiny, not, quote unquote, just playing baseball. Warwick, that's a lot of talking by me. What's your reaction? I know when I first wrote that story in the blog, it kind of hit you like, wow, that's a pretty cool story, because the thing that Albie, and here's the big part of the story that I almost left out because I got so excited. as he crossed home plate when he hit that home run off Whitey Ford, the first thing that flew in his head when he remembered that story of join my team, he thought, is this all there is? Is this all there is? The dream he had since age 6 had come true, mostly. And as he crossed home plate in front of fans, he could only think, is this all there is? Is baseball success? Is success what I wanted for myself? Is that all there is? And he discovered when he did this and he became a pastor and he helped underprivileged kids, and he's done that for 50 years, he realized there was more to his life, more to his calling than hitting and catching baseballs. So how did that story hit you, Warwick, when I first dropped it on you?
It's an amazing story, Gary, because often in some of the stories we're going to be talking about, we'll be talking about folks who are in cubicles. They feel like they're stuck, maybe depressed, maybe unfulfilled, and they're thinking, is this all there is? I'm an accountant, I'm an assistant. I mean, there's got to be more to life. But in this case, for all the world, Albie Pearson was living the dream. He's in Southern California playing for the Los Angeles Angels. Maybe it wasn't the World Series, but he hits a home run off the dreaded, the infamous, New York Yankees. You know, maybe some people think they're like Darth Vader's team. I don't know. Maybe that's cruel if you're a Yankees fan, but anybody that's not a Yankee, it's like, it's a wonderful thing to beat them. And so at the height of his success, it's like, is this all there is? And I don't know if he was thinking, gosh, this was really my dream and I was focused on myself. Or I don't quite know why Albie said that, but, clearly it was a wonderful journey, a wonderful dream. But yet he pivoted to another dream in which I'm sure he would say, as wonderful as being a Major League Baseball player was, he would probably say his second act was even more fulfilling, was even another level of joy. And here he gets to help at-risk male youth and become a pastor. And so it's a classic case of that first act wasn't so bad. It was pretty amazing. But yet there was a second act coming up that was even more amazing, even more fulfilling from his perspective.
Right. And it's funny to because it's true. Again, I talked to Albie a lot in the mid to late 90s about that story and about his baseball career. And when someone who's got the American League Rookie of the Year big enormous ring on his hand, puts his hand on and prays for you, you don't forget it as a baseball fan like me. But and Albie's success in baseball was not predestined. He's 5'5". They called him the littlest angel when he played for the Angels, and he was, sports writers call guys like that scrappy. They're not supposed to have long careers because he's short for baseball standards. But he carved out a career and he earned a little bit of a name for himself there. But the part of his story, Warwick, why it was unfulfilling, quote unquote, in a sense, playing baseball, is that he did grow up in a very faithful family. He was a Christian as a young man, and he was pursuing this dream, and he wasn't turning his back on his faith at all, but he wasn't walking in what he felt and others told him, recognized in him, were some spiritual gifts he had to help others in that way. And that was when he heard in his head this idea, or he thought, when he crossed home plate after hitting the homer off Whitey Ford, is this all there is? He came to the quick conclusion, nope, this isn't all there is for me. And as soon as his baseball career ended, he went out into his pastorate and his and I can tell you, I just mentioned Albie prayed for me several times. He was the kind of guy, still is. He's still living in Palm Springs area. But he's the kind of guy. Whenever I became a Christian in his son-in-law's church, and he's the kind of guy that when he would pray, it felt like all of God's presence in the room just got sucked into him, because he was just so gentle and kind and sweet and godly and all the things that you associate with truly living a humble life on purpose, dedicated to serving others. That is who Albie is. And the reason that he popped immediately to mind as we were going through the series, because every guest in some way or another had as part of their story, whether they articulated it or not, is this all there is? They were doing something that in many cases was fulfilling in its own way. Some of them felt stuck. Some of them had really bad crucibles. But whether they articulated the question or not, there was a moment in time where they were wondering, is this all there is for my life? Or could there be something better? Could there be something different? Could there be something that gives me a greater sense of purpose and significance? And the guests then that we're going to review here and the practical tips they give us about how to find that out and how to find that life of significance is how we're going to spend the balance of our time here. But is there anything you want to set listeners up to as we sort of go into these 4 tips of how you can scratch that "is this all there is" itch in your own life?
Yeah, I think what you said, Gary, is very profound. Is that how do you know when you're ready for a second act of significance? And often it's because, you're in a cubicle, maybe you're in a traumatic experience, maybe it's just life is just feeling, boring, you're feeling stuck. And so when you begin to say, day after day, going to the cubicle, going to the office, whatever it is this all there is? That is a question you need to listen at the depths of your soul, because that might mean, that whether you believe in God or some universal power, that it's not all there is. That maybe somebody up there intends something better, something greater for you from your perspective and, his perspective. So that question, is this all there is? If you ever think that, you may well be at the cusp of a turning point in your life, a pivot to a second act of significance. That is probably the single most powerful question and, huge sign that you may be about to transition to a wonderful new time of your life.
I wasn't wrong, you see, when I mistakenly thought or called you the co-host of the show, because that was exactly what I would say normally to set up what we're going to talk about. And here's what we're going to talk about, listener. We've got 4 tips, like I said, of how you can navigate that journey once that question, that is this all there is feeling, hits you. There are 4 ways, 4 hopes, inspirations, and then practical steps that you can take. So here's the first one. And the first truth is, it's never too late or too early to pursue a next act in life that brings you more significance. And this was a theme, Warwick, with a number of our guests, perhaps most resoundingly with Robert Miller. Robert Miller was like a lot of guys, like Albie, like a lot of guys who grow up wanting to play baseball. Robert Miller wanted to play music. He came of age during the Beatles, and he wanted to be a rock star. From the first time he picked up an instrument, that's what he wanted to pursue. But then his dreams got deferred, as often happens, right? There's beats in life, there's responsibilities, there's other jobs to pay the bills that maybe pay them more than playing music. There's relationships and marriage and kids and those things, and they were all great. He enjoyed them all. He ended up in a career as a lawyer, which lasted for decades. But in his 40s, he had a crucible, got in an accident, broke his neck. That got him thinking even more about that dream that he sort of left on the cutting room floor. And that's when, in his 60s, okay, he's done as a lawyer, he's retiring, and he picked up his guitar and he launched his band, Project Grand Slam. And finally, he got to feel the rush of playing original songs on a stage for an audience. And he's done it at festivals and concerts around the world. The group has released 11 albums with its unique brand of rock, Latin, jazz fusion. One of them has been, certified gold. He's got millions of downloads on video and on audio. And the key to all that story, right, is that he didn't just think about, boy, this was my dream. He finally decided, I got to act on this dream. And that's a pretty powerful first step to take, isn't it?
Yeah, I mean, Robert Miller is such a fascinating story. Grew up with a love of music. I think we're mentioning his dad was a jazz trumpeter. It's sort of an amazing story when you think about it. And briefly, he tried to get in that. Maybe I think he was working PBS in Boston, but I think his parents, dads, be practical as parents often do, and he, for the next umpteen decades, becomes a lawyer. He's living
Right.
in New York City and he's doing well. But you mentioned the accident when in his 40s. Even then, years went by and he's approaching 60. He finally just says, I'm just not going to let this go. I'm going to stop pursuing my dream. Now, most people, when they get in their late 50s, early 60s, they say, well, I had my shot. I had a good career. I've got a good life, married, family. But the fact that he made the pivot to Project Grand Slam and later his podcast, Follow Your Dream podcast, I mean, it's stunning. He just had the courage. He just hit a point where it's like, is this all there is? And, I'm just going to go for my dream. It's just incredible. It's just really the lesson there is it's never too late. No matter how old you are, it is never too late, and it wasn't for Robert Miller.
No. And in fact, listener, here's a clip from our original interview with Robert in which he, in his own words, talks about that moment when he decided, if I'm going to do it, I better do it soon. Here's that clip.
You have a dream, you have a path, you have a burning desire. Life gets in the way. We don't plan for it. It just happens. And it happens to most of us. Most people don't wind up doing exactly what they dreamt they would be doing when they were younger. Either it wasn't practical, or it wasn't in the cards, or their uncle offered them a job and they went into this, that, or the other thing. Stuff happens. That's the usual case. It's the unusual case of somebody that knows at an early age, this is what I want to do, and they actually do it. So the question then becomes, all right, do you let that dream go? Was it just a youthful fancy of some sort? Or do you pursue it? And frankly, when I decided to jump into the deep end of the pool, I had just passed my 60th birthday. And I said to myself, if I don't do it now, when the heck am I going to do it?
So when am I going to do it if I don't do it now? What a great question that is, right? If you've suppressed a dream, say he was a teenager, he was in his 60s, so you're talking 40, 45 years, that's a pretty amazing thing to do, to come to the place where you can say, I'm going to do it. I don't know how it's all going to turn out, but I'm going to do it.
Absolutely. I mean, 60th birthday, and yeah, he's saying if I don't do it now, when the heck am I going to do it? Just that sense of, do you let your dream go? He didn't let his dream go. He pursued it. And at 60, it is just stunning. And, I just love his story. And, one of the other things we learned from him is just the power of baby steps. He doesn't say, okay, great, day one, we're going to score Madison Square Garden and
Right.
It's going to be great. Well, life doesn't happen that way. And he puts an ad on Craigslist, I think, saying, I need a band. And, people applied, and he just started in, small places, and bit by bit it grew. But he wasn't afraid to begin somewhere. He started, and it grew to being, a Project Grand Slam with millions of downloads, and Follow Your Dream podcast with also a top-rated podcast. It's just stunning. Step by step, his dreams, it just grew. It's just an incredible model, exemplar, if you will, of second act significance.
And to pick up on something that you said early on when you were talking there, he set reasonable goals for it, right? He, at 16, when you have this dream, right? Albie Pearson's dream at 6 was to hit a grand slam and beat the Yankees in the World Series. Well, that didn't happen, but he did hit a home run against the Yankees. That was pretty great. Robert Miller did not have, as you said, I'm going to fill Madison Square Garden. His dream was, he didn't want to be, he wasn't trying to become at age 60, like quote unquote aging rockers like Paul McCartney, Mick Jagger, Bruce Springsteen. He wasn't looking to fill up stadiums. He just wanted to have success as he defined it in his own way, because all those other guys made it in their 20s. He was getting a late start, right? They got a 40-year head start on him. That probably wasn't going to happen, and he accepted it after he realized it, and he went and pursued significance as it was for him. He had a reasonable goal that left him feeling like he was living his life's purpose on purpose in service to others by giving them this musical gift, this musical talent that had bubbled up from him since he was a teenager. He's not the only one, though, because if you remember, our first point is it's never too late or too early. You're never too old or too young to move into a life of second act significance. And on the opposite end of Robert Miller is a guest we had on just in the last couple of weeks, Yvette Bodden, who was a young mother going through a very, very, very difficult divorce. And she faced the same decision. If there was more to life than what she was doing, she had an office job, and it was it was enough to sort of get by day to day, week to week. But as her life began to unravel through the divorce, she used that unraveling as a way to sort of explore what she really wanted to do and whether she was doing it. And she slowly found blessing and purpose, as she described it, that she says she wouldn't have ever discovered if she hadn't gone through the crucible that she went through. She was able through that to step into what she really felt like her heart was calling her to and what her giftings allowed her to do. And that was to become a thought leader and writer and create a web platform called Awakened Woman, which encourages women to dream big as they pursue their own passions by exercising their giftings. That was one of my favorite episodes of this series with Yvette. Maybe because I'm a journalist. I'm a journalist by training too. That's what she's doing now, and I felt a certain chemistry there with that. But what stands out for you about our conversation with Yvette?
Yvette is so authentic, vulnerable in the best sense of that word. She has a real compassion and heart, and hers is an amazing story. Growing up in New York City. The daughter of Dominican parents, and often with the immigrant experience, there's this great desire to obviously make it, but to be practical. And so here she was just working in a sort of administrative event planning role and, some probably office in New York City, and being all very practical, but kind of losing herself in a way. And
right.
She was married, and it's this sad thing of, as she described to us, the more that she began to get in touch with herself, she was journaling and beginning to write, the more she was becoming her, the real Yvette. As she put it, it caused distance in the marriage with her husband, which is unbelievably sad. And they had a daughter. And so as she was finding herself, the sheer act of finding herself, somehow contributed to the breakup of her marriage. I mean, she wasn't doing anything wrong. She was being herself, but for whatever reason, and this is part of it, it broke up the marriage, which was sort of devastating. But yet she didn't let that loss define her, nor did she say, I'm just going to still live my cubicle administration, event planning life. She kind of bounced forward, if you will, with Awakened Woman, as she's shared, I think maybe like 500 articles, and she wrote a book, The Journey to Becoming Your Best Self, which is, I guess, part inspiration, self-help, biography, some fictional stuff in there, really a mix of genres. And she really has this passion to help women rise up. I mean, she's just this, role model of not giving up and just inspiring so many people. I mean, she talks about how she's people from all around the world write to her, from Africa, from
right.
everywhere, and just saying, just inspiring that, I can rise up too. There was a wonderful moment in the podcast where, times were tough with, the depth of the breakup of her marriage. And, she probably had some moments where she was thinking, can I really get myself out of bed this morning? Because life was very grim. And, her daughter came to her and said, Mom, greatness takes time. And it felt like that was sort of part of her inspiration. And she wanted to rise up, not just for herself, but for her daughter. And it was just, she is so inspirational. Like, she didn't let tragedy define her. And her second act of just helping women rise up with Awakened Woman, it's stunning, it's empowering. She's helped so many women all around the globe, and she's an incredible story.
Yeah, and that story about her daughter, right? You've heard X doesn't fall far from the tree, right? The apple doesn't fall far from the tree over what the encouragement apple did not fall far from the tree, if that's what Yvette Boden's daughter was able to do to encourage her mom. Because what we'll hear right now in this clip from the show is Yvette talking about the way she tries to encourage women through awakenedwoman.com.
You can fall 100 times, but you can rise up. I know it sounds simple, but I wanted to inspire that fight in other women. And I feel that my writing is doing that. And when I get messages from women in Africa and other parts of the world, saying, you planted a seed, thank you for sharing your story. The same thing happened to me, and I feel like I can get past it. I know I'm doing something right.
The thing that stands out for me about that clip and about the whole show with Yvette was her heart. You can tell as you listen to her that she feels like what she's doing to help women is significant, but you can also tell that she feels significantly honored and blessed to be in the position to do it. When we talk about significance being living a life on purpose, dedicated to serving others, yes, that transfers significance to others, but it fills the person with an enormous sense of gratitude and significance from where she came to just in that clip that we just played, the emotion in her voice as she talks about what she tries to inspire women with is itself inspirational, and I hope is practical for listeners to sort of tap into that own root in themselves.
Yeah, Gary, I love the phrase that she has, you can fall 100 times, but you can rise up. Just her desire to fight for women, to help them rise up all around the globe by sharing their story. She loves interviewing, and you're right, she doesn't see it as about her so much as sharing the stories of these other amazing women. If you had to say what is the theme of her life, it's, you can rise up. You're not, we in our words, we say you're not defined by your worst day. Well, Yvette Boden wasn't. She rose up, her daughter has risen up, and she's helped women all around the globe rise up. So it's, her story is powerful, and it's an inspiration to all of us.
And here's some of the bonus content that's not in the blog that we're adding in here. Yvette and Robert aren't the only two folks who touched a little bit on the fact that it's not too late ever, or it's not too early ever to get moving toward a second act of significance if for whatever reason the first act did not feel as significant as your heart tells you it should. And another guest who touched on this in really powerful ways was Nancy Volpe Berenger, who was in her late 50s when she let herself not just dream of a career in fashion design, but pursue it. She had success and security with a great job, but there was something, again, she didn't put it in these words, but there was something there that said, is this all there is? As a young girl, she liked to sew, and she never pursued that. And she remembered that. And it led her into saying, okay, I'm in my 50s, about to turn 60, but it's not too late for me. How did that story hit you? And then we'll play her clip when that moment hit her.
Yeah, she is an inspiration. She had a good job in, I think, like a national teachers organization in New Jersey, and she was doing well, set for life. But it's like she had is this all there is moment, and began to think of fashion design. It's just it's just sort of stunning as, typically in your late 50s, you don't think of doing that. When you go to fashion school, so to speak, all the other people are like in their 20s, maybe 30s. They're all young.
Right.
But she didn't give up on her dream. It's just she had a "is this all there is" moment, and she didn't let her age define her or stop her courage about pursuing her dream. It's an amazing story.
And I will never forget her unlikely and powerful story about the moment when she decided to press into that second act of significance. And here's Nancy Volpe Berenger talking about it in the podcast.
It was 3 a.m. because I know exactly, because I wasn't sleeping. It's 3 a.m. and I'm thinking of my sons. The one is in finance, president of a company, very successful. The other, the musician, had graduated at a recording studio, but he wasn't making money. So he's teaching himself additional skills, photography, videography, all online. And believe it or not, I started thinking about what he was doing. It sounded so exciting, and I got jealous. I got jealous of my own son. And this is the moment my life changed. I dared to ask myself, if I was young again, what would I want to be learning? Hypothetical question. The amazing thing was the answer came immediately to me, and it was fashion design. Don't ask me where it came. It came immediately. So I'm still not sleeping, and I start researching programs, and I'm going in to see what schools, what's available, and then I see interior design. I'm like, well, maybe I should do that at my age. And then I went, no, Nancy, you're just dreaming. This is practical to stay where you're at. This isn't about being practical. This is about a fantasy if you were young. Well, I start researching it. By the next week, I was in New York touring 2 of the top fashion schools, and signed up for a drawing class because I did not know how to illustrate, but I started taking it the day of the one tour. And the last one I took happened to be in my backyard in Philadelphia, but it was always there. And once I answered it, there was no going back.
The thing, Warwick, that sticks out most for me about that episode with Nancy Volpe Berenger was later on she talks about where she found her true calling in fashion design. And that was when on the television show Project Runway, which she finished runner-up at in her 60s, just a couple of years ago, there was a challenge for all the designers to create a clothing look for Paralympians. And she tells this remarkable story about how she so wanted to help those folks, but she could tell that the other 10, 15 contestants around her didn't really have a lot of interest, and they were kind of like praying, like, please, no, I don't want to have to do it. And she was just chomping at the bit to go do it. And in almost 200 episodes of this show, it'll be 200 episodes in a couple episodes. I'm sorry, in almost 120 episodes of this show, I've never gotten the chills listening to a guest tell a story until Nancy told that story. How did you feel about the whole Nancy Volpe Berenger episode and that story where her calling came clear in particular?
Yeah, I mean, she said so many profound things. When I think she mentioned it was like 3 a.m. in her late 50s, she had this notion as, what would you do? What would I do if I were young? And it's like, well, I pursue fashion design. Okay, so I'm going to go there. So it's like, what would I do if I wasn't this age? It's a useful mental trick, if you will, to focus on what you love. But, it was more than just about herself and her career when she was on Project Runway. And there was a possibility of doing fashion for people who were disabled, people who were physically challenged, people who were different. She just said, oh, I want to do that. I mean, most of the others are like, I don't want to do that. It's going to be tough. So she has this notion with, her fashion. It's not just about building an empire or, building the greatest fashion brand on the planet or what have you. It's about serving others. I mean, truly is living a life of significance. I mean, it's not easy, I'm sure, to create fashions that are beautiful and practical for those with challenges and those who are different. Right. But she embraces the challenge because it's not about her. It's about serving others. And really, it's in serving others that we get true joy and fulfillment. And Nancy Volpe Veringer absolutely models that.
Yeah, and she, exactly to your point, what she loves so much about the challenge, what she loves so much about now the line that she has for differently abled people is that it does help them. And that these are people, this is what she said that still sticks out to me, that people who have often been they haven't had a chance for high couture fashion, right? People don't design for them. She designs for them, and it brings her heart alive, which is just a fantastic thing, and all about what significance is about, but also second-hand significance in particular. All right, that was point one of the journey, the road to charting the course to second act significance. Point two, when you set out on a journey to new significance, follow your heart and lean into your talents. The guest that perhaps best exemplified that to us, I think, was Melissa Reeves, who was in a really bad spot. She wasn't sure how her life was going to be okay after she got fired from a very well-paying job in advertising. But then what she called her inner voice assured her that she could muster the courage and inspiration to embark on a new career that has become a mission for her. And that career is helping professionals use the power of story to write happy endings for their businesses. She coaches clients in what she calls making mind movies that add depth and meaning to their communications. And doing so, here's the point, lean into your talents, follow your heart. Doing so has allowed her to tap into her youthful affinity and excellence in acting, reviving a part of her that she'd allowed to atrophy for a bit in her career choices up until then. Talk a little bit about how you felt listening to Melissa Reeves. I found her incredibly inspiring, and she was just so full of life. It was great.
Absolutely. Yeah, I mean, I love the fact that Melissa Reeves has this whole thing called story fruition, and she just sort of leans into telling stories, but she's just a funny person, an amusing person. She's amazing. I mean, she's always had this desire to act in musical theater in college. And she was in Orange County working for a paper there doing, I think, amongst others, digital advertising. And she was doing well. But I don't know, maybe she just wasn't the typical, boys club, as she puts, the typical guys, the Erics and the what have you of this world. And she gets fired, and yet she's doing well. And yet it seemed like while that was tough, I mean, she had a daughter who I think had so much OCD, she was almost bedridden. Right. But yet in that instance, she felt like, almost like voices in her head, maybe some powers above that were like, don't worry, you're going to be okay. You're going to be okay. That pink slip, it's like, yay. And she's like, no, yay. What do you mean, yay? How can this be a good thing? But yet it was her, she's very good at selling and stories. And, one of the key pivot points is she's standing in the hall of Seattle University's business plan competition, and they're there in business class pitching their ideas, and it's all, it's all very analytical, left brain, numbers and charts, and people are falling asleep. And she's like, I can help these students. It was like, the angels from heaven were singing, the
right.
light bulb goes off above her, if this is like a cartoon. I can do this. And
almost
so
that voice in Albie Pearson's head saying, join my team, right? There was this otherworldly thing. Yeah.
And she felt like, I can help them tell stories. And so now she helps investors and other business people tell the story of their business, but by telling compelling stories, personal stories. When you're appealing, even for investors, you got to have the numbers and you got to have the stuff that appeals to the mind. But if you don't appeal to the heart, it's going to be a no. People are going to say, no, you got to do both. And she's found her niche with story fruition and mind moving in helping business professionals tell their stories. So, and she's able to lead a good life for herself and her daughter. And it was just so inspiring. Just that aha moment in, Seattle University. It was just, it changed her life. So getting fired ended up being a blessing in some weird way.
Yeah, I've heard that expressed in another way, being but we'll get to that later about how having a life upending crucible can in fact be a gift. But what I love about her, Melissa, she was a fun guest. I mean, she told a lot of stories. She has a grand love of life. The stories she tells, she's got all kinds of. She would do voices and play different characters. It was fascinating, but she. In being able to use that acting ability that she teaches her clients, that was when she was able to finally wrap a vision around her giftings, right? And that she'd long let lie dormant. Here's how she explains it, or how she explained it on the show.
I, deep down, always thought I would be an entrepreneur. When I was 25 years old, I thought, I have taken Toastmasters. I am an excellent speaker. I am going to teach people Toastmasters, and that's what I'm going to do. And I started my little company, and I had like cards that said Speakeasy. That's what I was going to call it. I didn't really realize that it would probably have like a sexual connotation, and that wasn't the best branding trick. But I was only 25, and I was going to do this. And I then went, I am too young and dumb to do this. I'm not ready for it. But she, that entrepreneurial Melissa, was born inside me. So when I was stepping out of the smoldering flames and I started to listen to my higher self, all of a sudden my second half now is on my terms. It's my life. And if I need to be a little bit selfish to find my joy, then that's what I'm going to do, because I want to be the best mom I can be. I don't want to deal with Brian's and Eric's again that are going to make me feel like I'm not smart, because I am smart, and I am going to attract the clients that I want, and I'm going to be bringing them something that they didn't even know that they needed, but now that they do, they are so excited about the work we're doing. And I walk through most of the day with goosebumps. When I tap a story in one of my clients and we go, oh, there it is so much joy. And even though with being an entrepreneur, you're kind of on a boat ride or a roller coaster, it's going to go up, it's going to down, it's going to swirl. You're going to have good months, you're going to have thin months, but it doesn't matter, because if you're still believing in what you're doing, or I'll just talk for myself. When I started believing in what I was doing with joy and with value, how could this not be the best time in my life? I'm 56 years old. I am just starting.
I think the joy at the end of that clip, she says, it's my life. I'm living my life. I think that comes from living a life on purpose, dedicated to serving others, but also using those skills. What are those talents? This point 2, you'll remember, is to lean into your talents, follow your heart and lean into your talents. And that is a textbook case, what Melissa did in starting Story Fruition and the success that she's having now that goes beyond success, but to significance for herself and for clients, right?
Absolutely. Yeah. In that moment when she was fired, which, she talks about stepping out of the smoldering flames, it was painful, but she talks about how the entrepreneurial Melissa was sort of born, in that moment. And she kind of listened to her higher self, and, really all of her story was leading up to this moment. Speaking of story fruition, she loved telling stories and acting, but she could sell. And so just listening deep down, how can I use everything that I am, my ability to tell stories, my ability to sell, And because she was focused on that, and this is very important for listeners to understand, when you know who you are and your gifting and your talents, and almost a glimmer of your calling, when she was in Seattle University and saw those business school students try to sell with a very left-brained approach, she said, aha, this is it. I can do this. I know how to sell, but I know how to tell stories. And so because she'd done that soul work, she was set up to take advantage of that opportunity. So by leaning into your talents, following your heart, when opportunities come, you will be able to seize them, seize the day, and go full speed ahead. But you've got to do the prep work to take advantage of that opportunity, which in her case came at Seattle University.
Yep. And Melissa's not the only guest who has a story that traffics in some of those beats, that has some of those beats of follow your heart and follow what you've already come to understand are your talents. And John Busacker is another one who falls into that case. Carved out a great career in the financial services and leadership development industry, but then had a crucible that was, and I'll let you speak to the crucible since that's your term. So I'll let you have that. But he comes out on the other side of that crucible, a little bit of a shift to his life. He'll talk about it a bit in the clip, a little bit of a shift to that life. And he brings to bear what he was already gifted at and puts it in place for something a little bit different. But what was John's crucible, Warwick?
Yeah, I think he was driving along and he felt like he was having a heart attack. I mean, he stopped at, I think he lives in Minnesota, at the local Cub Foods, I think it was, and, going in there to get his, blood pressure measured. And he goes home and talks to his wife, who happens to be maybe even a cardiac nurse, like a, emergency room nurse or something, and says, honey, I think I'm not feeling too well. And she tried to say it calmly, but didn't work.
Yeah, she wasn't buying it. She wasn't buying it.
It's like, hold the phone. There's a problem here. And it turns out he wasn't, receiving he wasn't a heart attack. He was just, maybe having a heart moment, just somehow
right.
What he was doing, which he was doing fine. But he felt like, yeah, this is fine. Finance and leadership development. But he felt like there's something more. And, for him, he found his calling by helping his clients find their true calling and finish well. So he's still using his talents, but in something that he feels like is more in line with his higher self. And that heart attack was a divine tap on your shoulder saying, John, I need you to do something else here. You have a different mission.
And it's really important. I want listeners to make sure they hear this. What we just talked about Melissa and John, and we'll play John's clip in a minute because I think it's relevant to end the point I'm going to make, is that you don't have to, as you move from first act to second act, you don't abandon everything from the first act, right? There are all kinds of things you can gather up, gifts and talents and abilities and those things in your heart that maybe they've been unexpressed, but and untapped, but they're there. And so it's not like you throw out the life with the bathwater. You can pivot. Pivot's a good word, and Warwick's used it a couple times. Pivot. It's not a complete erasure and rewrite. It's a pivot into something that brings you a little bit more satisfaction and brings others and yourself more significance. But it's interesting. What John talks about in this clip here is this idea of finding your way and surviving the uncertainties of life. And it's a very important point as you look to navigate from Act 1 to Act 2. It's important to know that there's going to be some uncertainties in there. Stick with it. You'll do okay. Here's John Busacker.
We're forced often to let go of the illusion of certainty. Like we thought we had the answer. We thought we knew. We thought we were so certain about this. And it's like, oops, actually, it actually isn't that. Okay. And so in my own experiences of making career changes, for example, or different life experiences, things that I thought I was clear about, maybe I was at the time, but they became less clear in that space. And then I grew into a new understanding, a new learning. And hopefully, I say this with a certain amount of trepidation, hopefully that continues, right? Even though, again, that in-between space is uncomfortable.
You know, what stood out for me in that clip about John and in our whole conversation was his emphasis on the importance of transition moments. Great food for thought for anyone who's looking to build significance out of uncertainty, right?
Yeah, I mean, when you have those pivot points, as we said for John, it was that heart attack he thought he had, which is more of an anxiety attack, is just to understand what is that. And yes, he was using his talents before, but it was more, finance and leadership development. So then he pivoted. He's using his talents, as he puts it, to build hearts, which is really a stunning concept. And so, he was doing fine. You could say, yeah, he was leading a worthwhile life with, wealth management and leadership development. That's good. I mean, you're helping people and families. Nothing wrong with that. It wasn't like he was doing something horrific.
Right.
But yeah, he just felt like that's all good, but yet there was a second act. There was a higher act for him. And often, what does a higher act mean? Well, it depends on how you define it and how, if you're a person of faith, how, your spiritual mentor up above defines it, if you will. You co-create it. And so he just felt like he had a higher calling to help others find their true calling and finishing well. And so that's a good example of what he was doing wasn't so awful. He wasn't depressed, but yet clearly he got that big tap on the shoulder and, there's a higher mission for you. And he followed that. So when you have that tap on your shoulder, you got to listen. Don't miss out on, the next best act for your life.
Absolutely. And I have to stop and say at this point in the show, about halfway through our points here, that you're doing a better job as the quote unquote co-host than I do. So bravo, well done in pulling those balloon strings together for the listener. Point 3 in our discussion of how you move from first act to second act based on the insights and the experience of the guests that we've had on our series, Second Act Significance, is point 3 is starting small is okay because it's starting. That's the key, starting. And I think the guests who stand out the most on this one, Warwick, are Eric and Emily Orton. And they are, their story starts in a crucible. Eric's dream job of being a playwright and theatrical producer comes to a crashing halt. And I'm not laughing at him for it, but it's just like he's had this dream, and then it comes to this halt because his show closed after only a few performances. It was closed by his co-producer. And the failure left him fearful and rudderless. But then his curiosity about sailing became his family's passion for sailing. And they steered their boat's rudder on a 5,000-mile journey from New York to the Caribbean. And what Eric and Emily discovered on the trip, with their 5 kids sharing the adventure with them, was how to turn worry into wonder and the importance of building confidence, credibility, and calm. I loved talking to these two because they just, every time they opened their mouths, like things you had to take notes on came out. They're just very, very erudite and quite impactful and practical about how you move from one act to the other. And those are truths that they now teach through their speaking, writing, and coaching. The Ortons were our second guest. What was it about them that struck you?
Eric and Emily Orton, they're just amazing people. I love their hearts and their curiosity, and they are a solid team. I mean, yeah. I remember in the depths of what Eric was going through when, as you mentioned, well, actually, just to unpack it a little bit more, he was part of the Broadway play musical Wicked, and in Broadway, it's hard to be kind of set for life. He was,
Yeah.
This is going to go on for years, forever maybe, and he's part of the touring program. But then to have the courage to sort of do, I think, an off-Broadway play, and that kind of launches, and while his wife was in labor, his co-producer closes it. It had, middling reviews, not terrible, but he's out of a job, wiped out, and he's on the top floor of some building in Manhattan, just looking out at sailboats and just feeling depressed. And his dinner breaks, he had to work at night, he's calling his wife, and she's encouraging him. And in the depths of what he was going through, Emily had this phrase in which, I'll always bet on Eric Orton.
Right.
I mean, that is amazing. You have that kind of husband or wife that says that to you. That is just inspiring. But it was just the baby steps they took, looking out at sailing. And it's like, well, why don't I kind of go to sailing school? And it's like, well, that's going to be tough because you need, 5 people or 3 people. And it's like, okay, well, how about we have a couple of our kids? And, and little bit by little bit, they did sailing. And, eventually this led to this mind-blowing concept of being with 5 kids on a year-long 5,000-mile journey to the Caribbean. I mean, and then that led to their book, 7 at Sea, that uses that as a metaphor for, as you put it, turning worry into wonder, and the Awesome Factory, there, sort of consulting and speaking. But it all started with, with a little step, and just following their heart, but just that one image of just in the top of this building, looking out at those sailboats and thinking, maybe I could get into sailing. Maybe, I don't know, how about if I take some sailing lessons? That was all the first step was. Let me take a sailing lesson. It wasn't create the awesome factory, write a book. It was just, that doesn't seem like a big step. Let me take a sailing lesson. But just that sense of step by step, not letting fear destroy you, not letting, crushing Broadway crucible, destroy you. It was, he really did turn worry into wonder. I mean, he really did. He lived his principle.
And here is, from Eric's own lips and own experience, is that pivotal moment. And as Warwick said, as we've said, it could not, as this point makes clear, it could not have started smaller.
During my dinner break, that's when Emily and I would get on the phone and we would talk as we tried to figure out how to dig ourselves out of this hole that we found ourselves in. And I would describe this to her, and she said to me, she was happy that I would see these boats and that they kind of gave me a sense of peace. And as I described it often enough, I realized that there was a sailing school right downstairs from where I worked, and that's where these boats were coming from. And she said, you should go check it out. Maybe you'd want to learn how to sail.
The thing about the Ortons, Warwick, that really struck me the most is that the legacy that they're building into their children. We talk a lot at Beyond the Crucible and in Crucible Leadership about the importance of legacy and bringing their 5 kids along on that 5,000-mile journey that they took, and the lessons that they taught about attacking your fears, trusting in their ability to figure it out, to step forward toward a worthy goal, even if you don't have all the boxes checked, right? Go feel the wind in your hair, even if you don't have all the answers in your head just yet. That's what the Ortons taught their kids. And that's going to pay legacy dividends to their children, to their grandchildren, to their great-grandchildren. That's a pivotal, important moment about why second act significance can have such a long tail.
Absolutely, Gary. I mean, one of the things that he said to his wife, Emily, to try and sell this whole, because she's a very practical person, this whole spend a year going sailing, he said, our kids are going to have me 24/7. And for a lot of guys in the working world, that doesn't happen, especially at a young age.
Right.
It's like, wow, have my husband 24/7 with my kids? That sounds pretty cool. Have us together. I mean, a lot of, working women these days obviously have both of us, 24/7 with our kids. In this day and age, that never happens. And so that was inspiring, and just the life lessons with his kids. One of the things that one of his kids said is, "Mom and Dad, I learned to be comfortable with being uncomfortable." I mean, that is stunning. So the life lessons, and now the lessons he's able to help he and Emily teach others is just incredible. But it just started with that small step, looking out the window at those sailboats. It's just an inspiring story.
Yeah. And again, makes the point, as we said earlier, you're never too old or too young, and your first step is never too minor. It's never too small. It's never too baby. It's never too infant. It's important. It can get you along the way. And another guest that we had on this show might have been, he was one of my favorite ones because he makes pasta sauce that I got, and it was really, really, really good. But that's Chris Schneeberger. And Chris Schneeberger, again, speaking of plays, of the theater, he had returned home in New York City in 2015 after producing a successful Broadway play in Italy, only to find himself, and these were his words, he found himself when he got home feeling insecure, lonely, disconnected, and unfulfilled. His antidote for that crucible was food and friendship. But before we unpack that a little bit, I want to get to, because I want Chris to describe just how small and how non-visionary that all started. And here's Chris talking about it when we talked to him on the show.
He said, how do I recreate the magic that I felt over in Italy? What was it about Italy that, La Dolce Vita? Was it how they walked, how they talked, how they dressed, how they honored history, how they loved art? No, it's how they ate food. Specifically, it's how they ate food amongst community. So I got to do that. So here in my kitchen in New York City, I started playing around with all these different recipes and accidentally created a pasta sauce recipe. I thought it was a decent recipe. Gary thinks it's pretty I have to say, I ate it a couple days ago when my stepdaughter's boyfriend came over for dinner, and it was a huge hit with everyone. We're buying more. Yeah.
So.
Heck yeah. And, I figured I should probably feed it to people and maybe host a dinner party. So July 15th, 2015, 2 months after we got back from Rome, Italy, I called up my buddy Trip Derek Barnes and I said, can I use your backyard? I want to host a dinner party. At the time, it was just 15 friends coming over for dinner at 6:30 p.m. Each of them brought a bottle of wine. We worked together to create the meal. We served each other. We had great conversations, decent pasta sauce. And you know what? The rest is history.
He was, Chris was a very entertaining, very enlivening guest, was he not?
Absolutely. I love how he talks about, Italian American guy, goes to Italy, is doing some stuff with plays. And like many of us who've been to Italy, he loves the whole dolce vita. I think it means sort of the sweet life, the beautiful life. It just conjures movies of, Italian movies of the 60s and all, and, the beautiful life, the beautiful people. So he comes back and he's not feeling, the La Dolce Vita back in the U.S., back in New York where he's from. And so just that idea of, well, let me just have a few friends over for dinner. It's probably what you do in Italy all the time, and we'll talk, we'll have fun. He's got this pasta sauce. And, out of that, he has this notion of having a meal where you have real conversation, and just something simple as, what one person do you want to tell that how grateful you are for them? It's just a simple thing. And it's mushrooms. And not just grateful because of something great they did, maybe grateful because of something that they let you down on. That's an important point. And some of his best answers, he said, came out of that second half of that question. Yeah, amazing. So, he was an amazing guest, and just that idea of, well, I kind of enjoy being with people, and pasta and pasta sauce and all, and real conversations, and just being grateful for the things, good or bad, that have happened in your life. But it was all came out of somewhat of a small step. Let's invite a few friends over for dinner, and I've got this pasta sauce I'd like to try out. It wasn't this mega vision.
No, and it grew, right? It grew into 500,000 relationships have been helped through what he does, through what he calls the 747, because that's the time the dinners start gratitude experience. He was named USA Today's gratitude guru. Rolling Stone gave him a big award. I mean, it really, really, really took off for him. And all it started out as almost self-therapy because he was feeling so lost when he got back from New York. And I mean, when he got back from Italy, back to New York, he was feeling lost. So he's launched this thing first to help himself. And lo and behold, he's helped all of these other people. But there's a significant part, as we're talking about significance, of Chris's story, because it shines a light on something that we can't make clear enough. And that we called this series Second Act Significance for a reason, because it's not last act significance. Your second act, as significant as it can become, isn't necessarily, probably in most cases, your last act. Because like your crucible, it does not have to be the end of your story. Second acts change, morph, grow, and sometimes, as in Chris's case, lead to a third act. And for him, that third act came out when his vision, right, what he started with this simple step, grew into this big thing. And as he described it, it went from his vision to being his exact, not words, his exact letters, a J-O-B. And that's when things got difficult for him again. And he had to launch into a third act where he sort of reconstituted some things about the way that he was doing to get him back to what he loves about building community. And that's what he's walking out now. So that point, I don't think we can make enough. We called it second act significance because we know it's not last act significance in many, if not most cases.
Yeah, no, that's true. I mean, it's easy for your vision to begin to own you, and it's making all these corporate partnerships and deals. And as you're building your second act, you always want to make sure that it's, your vision and your dream is serving you, and, you don't end up getting kind of all good things, if you're not careful, can almost control you, what have you. So that was a good realization that he needed to kind of get balance and just make sure that he just recovers the joy of just those initial dinner parties with friends. So that was, right. That's a good word.
Yeah. All right. 3 points down, 1 to go. Here's the last point, the bonus point that's not in our blog. And I'd be lying if I said that this wasn't in part inspired by a historical figure whom I know our host loves. And that, the fourth point is, listen to Churchill, who said, never give in. Never, 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 never. Warwick, help us with the context of where that came from.
Indeed. Obviously, love Winston Churchill, as so many of us do. So really, as listeners might know, he was prime minister in World War II, became prime minister, I think, in May 1940, when Britain was almost at its lowest ebb. Hitler and Nazi Germany had swept through Europe. They just conquered France, and the Battle of Britain was about to start. And it sure seemed like Britain was going to be next on, with the onslaught of Nazi Germany. So he gave this speech in Parliament, and basically, we'll fight them on the beaches, in the villages and the towns, but we are never going to give in. We are never, never, never going to give up. So the point of that story is, if you were living in Britain in May 1940, the summer of 1940, things couldn't be possibly much worse. It was Britain against the world. U.S. would come in a year and a half later or so in December 1941, but at the time, it was pretty much Britain and its Commonwealth, I suppose, including Australia, Canada, a few other places. But life looked pretty dire. But yet it's like, we're not giving up here. We're going to defend our island. We're not going to give up. So that the fighting spirit of the British people amidst the onslaught of, nightly bombings was incredible. So yeah, at your lowest ebb, you need to channel your inner Churchill of not to give up.
Right. And that is relevant to this discussion of our wrap-up of the series, Second Act Significance, because some guests had to go through that. Many of you, as you pursue your own second act of significance, could find yourselves very likely will find yourself hitting brick walls, hitting some doors you thought should be open that aren't open, that require you to never, I'm going to make sure I get the right, never give in, never, 4 nevers, never give in. And the guest that really exemplified that for us was Gary Schneeberger, who had confronted and conquered the drinking she realized was causing a problem in her life. She attended Alcoholics Anonymous for a while, but felt that wasn't her story. That wasn't going to be a long-term solution for her. And then, as she's going to describe in this clip right here, she heard a podcast guest talk about something that made crystal clear what her second act of significance should be. Here's Carrie.
Right around this time, I heard the term gray area drinking via a guest that was on a podcast. And when I was walking my dog and I heard this podcast interview, I literally stopped in the middle of the street. It was a warm summer morning, like 7:30 in the morning. And I was like, oh my gosh, that's what I was. I never identified as an alcoholic. I was a gray area drinker. So I came home. It was like the fire was just burning inside me. I came home and I researched everything I could on gray area drinking, and there wasn't a lot out there. And I thought, if I can share what gray area drinking is with more people, I'll get them to raise their hand before they get into a deeper addiction.
Warwick, the thing I hinted at the top of the show about there's something surprising that I didn't even know. I was talking about Albie Pearson, right? And his rounding the bases after he hit the home run off Whitey Ford and thinking, is this all there is? You may not remember this, but when we interviewed Carrie, and she was our first guest, so it was a while ago, she recounted that at age 7, she remembers thinking about her life. And these are the exact words that she used. Is this all there is to life? She asked herself at age 7 and thought that was kind of a weird question, but that was the kind of ennui she was going through even as a child before she then embarked on a journey of soul-crushing crucibles. And even as she went through that, she found success in each of her multiple career stops. But that question she asked herself at 7, as she moved forward in life, she had to have asked herself that question over and over and over again until she pivoted into significance.
Yeah, I mean, it took a while for Gary Schneeberger. I mean, there's always reasons why, she, I guess, didn't define herself as an alcoholic, but as she terms it, a gray area drinker. But, she'd spend weekends saying, well, I'll just drink on the weekends, and weekends became Thursday to Monday, and the weekends kept extending. And she that's what she says is there's always a why. Well, why was I doing that? And ultimately, yes, she was dissatisfied with parts of her life, but really she was dissatisfied with herself. And
right.
Sadly, there was sort of an origin story of that dissatisfaction. She was physically and sexually abused as a teenager by some older boys. And obviously, and incredibly sadly, that is going to damage your self-image. She met this great guy, and some of the challenges I think they had early on was because she didn't like herself. It's like, how could this guy like me? And that's going to be a challenge in a marriage if you go, well, why would somebody like me? So she was I think a Porsche dealer in sales. She was doing fine. But when, as we just heard, when she just came upon this notion of gray area drinking, it's like, that's me. And maybe
right.
I can help other people, not just people who are drinking, but people who have relationship issues, career issues. Maybe they're living life in the gray. Maybe they're not living their full lives. So, all of that pain was leading up to that point in which, this is my calling. Right. This could be me.
And yet, like the reason that she's in the section about never, I don't know if I got enough nevers in there, never give in, is because when she first stepped out, and you heard the enthusiasm, listener, in her voice when she was telling the story about how gray area drinking, that's what I am. She hit a brick wall right off the bat. She went to her church and said, I want to have a small group in my church, in our church here and talk about this gray area drinking. And she was told that it wasn't, that they weren't going to let her do that because they already had an addiction recovery group. And that sort of set her off initially to be a little, upset. But then she talked to a friend who said, well, wait a minute, if this is something that truly has been stamped on your heart to do, if this is not her friend's words, but our words in the context of this series, if this is what's going to lead you to second act significance, why are you going to let somebody stop you? Go do it. Go start it on your own. And that's when Gary Schneeberger founded Gray Tonic, not just about drinking, but about, as you said, helping people through relationship issues and other things. That's when she went out on her own as a coach, and that is her life of significance now, on purpose, dedicated to serving others. And her first step out of the gate, it wasn't like the curtain opened on the second act right away. No, they kept it shut for a while, and she had to work hard to get it to open, and it did. And she started her own thing, and look where she is now. So that's a telling story for folks about, you got to have some perseverance too. You've got what you feel like God, the universe, is telling you to do. You've got gifts and passions. You're taking a small step. You're going to do it. You can still hit a roadblock. You can still hit a closed curtain, and you have to work to get through that. And she's an exemplary example of that, right?
Yeah, so well said. I mean, sometimes your first, baby step, you hit a brick wall. You get hit over the head with a sledgehammer. It's like, okay, not taking any more baby steps, not getting out of bed, not leaving the house. Okay, clearly this was a bad idea. But yet she had a lot more guts and determination. And she could have been angry at her church, which she probably was a little frustrated, I'm guessing. But she didn't give up. She could have said, well, who needs gray, tonic? Makes no sense. There's Alcoholics Anonymous. Maybe people don't identify with gray area drinking. She could have gone in a negative anti-dream, anti-vision spiral in which this proves how there's no market for this. There's no need. I'm just going to give up. But yet she didn't. She persevered. And she said, look, I really believe in this. I'm going to keep going.
Right.
Nothing against Alcoholics Anonymous or other recovery programs. But I feel there's a bunch of people that say, look, hey, I'm not an alcoholic. I just have a little drinking problem. Whether that's true or not, the point is there are some people who will come to Gray Tonic that will never go to Alcoholics Anonymous or some other group. But, they will self-identify, hey, this is me. So she didn't give up. She pursued her vision, and that's really a model for us. You don't give up when your first step gets crushed the way it did for her.
Right. Okay, that's a good lead-in, co-host. That's a good lead-in. I'm not a math whiz, as anybody who knows me knows, but my tally says we've just reviewed the stories of 8 guests, 9 counting both of the Ortons, but we're not done just yet. I think to really wrap a bow on the package that has been second act significance, we have another story to tap into just a bit, because it occurs to me it's the perfect closing note for how we persevere when the first act has been painful and or unfulfilling, and press ahead to that life of significance, which you, Warwick, describe as a life on purpose dedicated to serving others. Anybody you know of who been through a similar situation like that might have a good story to end this show?
Yeah, me. So we talk a lot about crucible moments, but I had a cubicle moment, actually.
Oh, love it. Great co-host thing again. You're killing me.
So most people who've been listening to this podcast for a while know 150-year-old family business that I grew up in, massive media company that had the, newspapers, TV, radio stations, equivalent to the New York Times, Washington Post, Wall Street Journal. Did the $2.25 billion takeover after Oxford, Harvard Business School, Wall Street. A few years, 3 years later in 1990, too much debt, Australia got in a recession, company went bankrupt. People have heard that story and how I bounced back. What people haven't heard so much is I had a cubicle moment where eventually, I live in Maryland and got a job at a local aviation services firm doing financial strategic planning analysis. And, I was doing well, wasn't getting paid a whole lot, as I've said before. Felt like I was the lowest paid Harvard Business School graduate in history, which not so much about the money, which isn't that important to me, but about, hurt my ego. So things were okay. I was doing fine. I was literally in a cubicle, the way, a lot of us are.
Right.
And I had this moment where I had is this all there is? And being a person of faith, I was journaling and I felt like, again, as a person of faith, the Lord telling me, you are playing small. You are not using all the gifts and talents I've given you for me. And it wasn't like it was beneath me. I was getting great performance reviews and I wasn't depressed or whatever. I just felt like, is this all there is? There's got to be more. And so I quit. And, I didn't have millions in the bank, but I had some amount that I had some wherewithal to be able to find myself, so to speak. And that led me on a quest to becoming an executive coach, to giving that speech in church, which people have heard me talk about in 2008, which people said, gosh, your story really helped me. That led me to writing a book that led to Crucible Leadership and this podcast, Beyond the Crucible. But it all started with that cubicle moment. Is this all there is? I'm doing financial and strategic planning analysis, but there's more. I'm not using all my gifts for the Lord, for the kingdom, for a higher purpose. It wasn't terrible, but it was like I had, is this all there is moment? And it was, yes, my cubicle moment.
And keeping in line with point 4 of our discussion here, listen to Churchill, never give in, never, 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 never. I know for a fact, I don't have to say I assume, I know from knowing you that there were times when roadblocks hit as you were moving toward that life of significance. You were moving toward there's got to be more than that. Is this all there is? And you pushed through them. How did you do that? What was what gave you the strength, courage, wherewithal to be able to punch through those stoppages that were thrown in front of you?
So as I tried to take baby steps to making my vision a reality, which originally back, from 2008 on for, next several years. In fact, it took 12 years to get the book published in, October last year, October 2021. But
and the book is called what?
Crucible Leadership, Embrace Your Trials to Lead a Life of Significance.
There we go.
Some of those early roadblocks was I thought to myself, well, I can get this published in Australia. My name, at least, was pretty big. Fairfax Media is a big deal. Surely I can find somebody interested. And because of the name of Fairfax Media and my name, there were publishers that would talk to me, but some said, well, we want more of a salacious tell-all book. And I wasn't going to diss on my family. I'm happy to throw rocks at myself and my own stupidity and mistakes, not about other people. And then another one said, well, this could be good, but if you're in the leadership space, you need to have a following, email following. I didn't say podcast back then, but email, social media following. It's like, well, good point. I don't have that. Well, it took years to, I found a team, but then built up social media, email list. And finally, I was at a point where, a major publisher in the US, Morgan James, published it. But yeah, I could have said, oh, well, I guess if Australia is going to say no, what is the chance of the US saying yes? Because nobody's heard of me here. So I could have said, well, that's it. I'm giving up. And why didn't I give up? It's because I felt like if my story can help one other person, it is worth writing. It is worth getting published. And just listening to people after church in 2008 said, boy, your story really helped me. It was that vision. It's not about me. It really was a life of significance, a life on purpose dedicated to serving others. I felt like, I honestly believe at the core of my gut, at the core of my heart, that my story can help people. And so I was not going to give up. I was going to persevere because it's not about me. It's about something bigger than me. It's about helping others. And that's what kept me going, to keep taking one more baby step, one more no, to eventually it became a yes from Morgan James, one of the big US publishers. So yeah, it was the power of the vision and my passion for seeing how that could help others that kept me persevering, kept me moving through the nose.
And would you say to the listener directly, do you believe that where you've landed now, and speaking of landed, we're getting close to where we have to land the plane. Would you say to the listener that you have arrived at a place where you feel as though you are leading a life of second act significance, that it was worth it going through what you went through before and then pushing through those roadblocks? Are you living a life of significance today?
Yeah, I mean, absolutely. I can identify with Nancy Volpe Berenger and Robert Miller in the sense that, I was sort of more towards my late 40s when that speech in church happened in 2008. And, I got my book published when, I guess doing the math, just over 60. I mean, it's easy to feel like, gosh, I wish I could have published a book 20 years ago, but, it is worth it. And I'm just loving this second act and being able to have this podcast and my book and speaking where I feel like I can help people not see their worst day as something that defines them, but indeed have a vision that's beyond them that does lead to a joyful and fulfilling life, a life of significance, focused on others, dedicated to a higher purpose. So absolutely. I mean, I feel so blessed with my, wife. It's funny, as we're recording this, it so happens we have our anniversaries on May 20, which is sort of ironic.
It's my anniversary too on May 20th.
Exactly.
We're both celebrating wedding anniversaries on the day this is being recorded, yes.
So this is a day when I think I can speak for both of us. We feel incredibly blessed by our wives and families and the work that we do, and both leading lives of significance. So yeah, I mean, I think we can both say we feel blessed and joyful, and I'm just so grateful. I love what I'm doing, and I do feel absolutely blessed.
That is the sound of the plane's landing gear touching down, and everybody's unbuckling their seatbelts before they're supposed to, and we are on the ground. But there's a couple things I have to say before we bid adieu. One is let's review what we've talked about here, folks, so that here's what we've laid out as sort of the 4 steps toward moving from first act to second act of significance as unpacked in the guests we've had on this 8-part series, Second Act Significance. Step 1, it's never too late or too early to pursue a next act in a life that brings you more significance. Number 2, when you set out on a journey to new significance, follow your heart and lean into your talents. Number 3, starting small is okay, because it's starting. And then number 4, and this is good advice in general, I think Warwick would say, listen to Churchill. Never give in, never, 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 never. And I'll add another never. I'll take it one step farther than Churchill. Never give in, because you're always one baby step away from breakthrough. I think that is true. As we wrap, I'm going to ask you to do a few things, listener. First, ponder these 3 questions at the end of the blog on this subject at crucibleleadership.com as you look to chart your own course to second act significance. So these are 3 questions that you can kind of ponder as you take what we've talked about here, what you've heard in 8 episodes of the series, as you move forward to try to latch on to that next act of significance for you. Ask yourself this question. Do you have an is this all there is itch you've been wanting to scratch? What's holding you back? Ponder that. Do you have it? And if you have it and you're not acting on it, what's holding you back from doing so? Number 2, what are the skills and passions you have that can serve you if you start on the journey to a life of greater significance? What are the skills and passions you have that can serve you if you start on this journey to a life of second act significance? And then number 3, ponder this. What would significance look like for you if you grab hold of it in that next act in your life? Why would that be more rewarding and fulfilling than what you're doing now? So Write those things down. If you missed any of them, because I didn't tell you to get a pen in your hand before I talked, or I talked too fast, they're at the end of the blog at crucibleleadership.com, where you can find those reflection questions. And then the last thing I'm going to leave you with, and I can't encourage you enough to re-listen or to listen for the first time to the 8 episodes featuring the guests that we've just spoken about. And listen with one ear on what the guests said that applies to your situation, and inspire and equip you to stepping onto the on-ramp that will take you to your life of second act significance. In other words, absorb their stories because they're interesting, hopeful, emotional, moving stories. But listen with one ear to, are there things in their stories that even we didn't talk about here that you can pull out and apply to your own situation as you look to move on to your act of second act significance? We have wrapped this series up. I'm going to give you a little bit of, just a teaser. I'm going to defy all of my public relations training to say I should tell you what's coming next. I'm just going to tease you with what's coming next. And I'm only going to tease you with this. We have a summer series coming up that we think that you're going to like a lot. In a couple of weeks, you'll know more about it. So it's on its way. We're developing it, like getting it all down, and we're going to start recording this between me and Warwick. It's going to be good stuff. You're going to like it. And I think it's going to give you some excellent, excellent takeaways for how to continue to pursue your life of significance and move beyond your crucibles. And speaking of crucibles, until the next time we're together, please remember that we do know that your crucibles are painful. We've been through them. We know that they're painful, but we also know without question, they are not the end of your story. In fact, they can be the first step, the first bits of writing in the next act of your story, which can be the best act of your story. Because when you learn the lessons of your crucible and you pursue something that is a life on purpose dedicated to serving others, as you pursue that, where you end up, where that journey takes you, brand new story, best story of your life, because its end place is a life of significance.